The early morning sun bathed the quiet streets of Montgomery, Alabama, in a soft golden glow. The old neighborhood grocery store, Harper's Market, stood at the corner of Main Street, a relic from a bygone era. Its weathered brick walls bore the scars of time, and a faded wooden sign creaked above the entrance with each gust of wind. The scent of fresh-baked bread from the nearby bakery mingled with the rich aroma of coffee brewing inside the store. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirping of birds created a deceptive sense of peace. Inside the store, shelves were lined with neatly stacked goods, canned soups, dry cereals, and sacks of flour arranged with meticulous precision. A small, flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting an artificial glow over the counter where Edgar Harper, the owner, stood. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, Edgar carried himself with the quiet arrogance of someone who had never known struggle. His graying hair was slicked back, his sharp blue eyes constantly scanning his store, ensuring that everything remained exactly as he liked it, clean, orderly, and most importantly, exclusive to the right kind of people. Then, the door creaked open. A woman stepped inside, hesitant yet determined. Her clothes were worn, her shoes scuffed, and her hands clutched the few crumpled bills she had left. Rosa Williams, a single mother barely scraping by, had come to buy food for her son. Her dark curls were pulled back into a simple ponytail, her tired brown eyes reflecting the weight of a lifetime of struggles. The moment Edgar's gaze fell upon her, his expression hardened. He sniffed disapprovingly and folded his arms across his chest. "What do you want?" he asked coldly. And just like that, the story began. Rosa took a small, shaky step forward, her fingers tightening around the little money she had. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I just need a few things, some bread, milk, and eggs." Edgar Harper didn't move. His piercing blue eyes ran over her, taking in the worn-out cardigan stretched thin over her shoulders, the patches on her jeans, the frayed edges of her sneakers. His lips curled in disdain. "We don't do charity here," he said flatly, leaning against the counter. Rosa's face heated with embarrassment, but she refused to shrink. "I'm not asking for charity," she replied. "I have money." She held up the bills, crumpled but real, her fingers trembling slightly. Edgar huffed. "Your kind always has just enough, don't they?" He straightened up and crossed his arms. "We serve hardworking folks here. People who earn their way. Not beggars and freeloaders looking for a handout." A tense silence stretched between them. The other customers in the store, a middle-aged woman in a pearl necklace, an elderly man clutching a bag of oranges, turned away, pretending not to hear. No one spoke up. Rosa swallowed, forcing herself to stand tall. "I work," she said, her voice firm. "I clean houses. I take care of my son. I don't care," Edgar interrupted. His voice was sharper now, colder. "You're not welcome here." He grabbed the edge of the counter and leaned toward her, his towering frame casting a long shadow. "So take your money and go before I call the cops." The words hit like a slap. Rosa felt her stomach tighten, her throat constricting. This wasn't just about groceries anymore. It was about dignity. About the way people like Edgar saw her, not as a woman, not as a mother, but as less. Her hands clenched at her sides. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to fight, to throw his words back at him, to demand her right to be treated like any other paying customer. But she knew how this would end. She took a breath, blinked away the sting in her eyes, and nodded. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out. The cold morning air hit her like a slap. The door shut behind her with a hollow thud, sealing in Edgar's world. A world where men like him held power, where women like her had to swallow their pride just to get by. She stopped at the curb, exhaling shakily. Behind her, the faint murmur of voices continued inside the store. A few customers cast glances her way through the window. None of them would remember her in an hour. But Rosa would remember this moment for the rest of her life. And she swore, right then and there, that this wasn't the end of her story. Not by a long shot. Rosa walked home with her head held high, but inside, she was unraveling. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of Edgar Harper's words pressing down on her like a cruel hand. Her tiny apartment, nestled in the rougher part of town, wasn't much, but it was home. The old walls carried the scent of warm spices, laundry detergent, and the faintest trace of vanilla from the candle she always kept lit. It was small, but it was clean. Her 7-year-old son, Daniel, sat on the couch, coloring in his notebook. He looked up as she walked in, his bright brown eyes filled with excitement. "Mom, I drew a new superhero today. His name is Captain Brave. He helps people who don't have homes." Rosa forced a smile, brushing his curls from his forehead. "That's wonderful, baby." But Daniel's face fell as his eyes drifted to her empty hands. "Where's the food?" he asked softly. Rosa hesitated. She had promised him pancakes for breakfast. She had planned it all out, just a small meal, but something to make him smile. And now? She knelt beside him. "I'll figure something out," she whispered. Daniel nodded, trusting her completely. But Rosa felt the sting of failure deep in her bones. She wasn't going to let this be their story. That night, Rosa sat at the rickety kitchen table, staring at the faded eviction notice pinned to the fridge. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings were nearly gone. Cleaning houses barely kept them afloat. She thought about Edgar Harper, about his sneer, his arrogance, the way he looked at her like she was dirt beneath his shoes. Then she thought about all the times people like him had knocked her down. A slow, determined fire burned in her chest. No more. Rosa reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. After 3 rings, a warm, familiar voice answered. "Rosa." It was Eleanor Langston, her former boss, the woman she had worked for before she left to take care of Daniel full-time. Eleanor was a powerhouse in real estate, a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. "I need a job," Rosa said, skipping the pleasantries. "Something bigger. I'm tired of barely surviving." There was a pause. Then, Eleanor's voice softened. "Come by my office tomorrow morning. Let's talk." The next day, Rosa arrived at Langston and Company, a sleek real estate firm in the heart of the city. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the sharp contrast between this world and the one she had just left. Here, everything smelled like polished wood and ambition. Eleanor sat behind a glass desk, her silver hair swept into a bun. She had always been kind to Rosa, treating her as more than just a housekeeper. Eleanor leaned forward. "You always had a sharp mind, Rosa. I remember the way you managed my home, organized, efficient. You handled finances better than my own assistant." She studied Rosa carefully. "Why real estate?" Rosa took a deep breath. "Because I want security. Not just for me, but for my son. I want to stop feeling powerless. And I never, ever want to be in a position where a man like Edgar Harper can humiliate me again." Eleanor smiled. "Good answer." She slid a folder across the desk. "We're launching a new affordable housing project. I need someone with real, lived experience, someone who understands struggle, to help market it to the right buyers." Rosa's hands trembled as she opened the folder. It was an opportunity. A real one. And she wasn't going to waste it. Rosa threw herself into the job. She worked late into the night, studying market trends, learning how to negotiate, how to sell. She shadowed top agents, absorbed everything like a sponge, and refused to let doubt creep in. Her passion set her apart. She wasn't just selling houses, she was giving people a chance at stability, something she had longed for herself. Weeks turned into months. Rosa closed deal after deal, proving herself in a world that had never been designed for her to succeed. She dressed the part, spoke with confidence, and soon she wasn't just another new hire, she was rising. And then, fate handed her a full-circle moment. Eleanor called her into her office, a slow smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "How do you feel about commercial real estate?" Rosa's brow furrowed. "I haven't worked on the commercial side before." "Well," Eleanor said, sliding another folder across the desk, "you're about to." Rosa opened it, and her heart stopped. Inside was a list of properties available for sale in Montgomery. Among them, Harper's Market, Edgar Harper's store, for sale. Rosa felt a slow, incredulous smile spread across her face. Life had just given her a chance to rewrite the story. And this time, she held the pen. The next morning, Rosa drove back to Main Street. This time, in a sleek black sedan, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and heels that clicked against the pavement with purpose. She stepped into Harper's Market, and the familiar ding of the bell overhead sent a shiver of déjà vu down her spine. Edgar Harper stood behind the counter, the same way he had the last time she was here. Only this time, he wasn't the one in control. He barely glanced up. "What do you want?" he grumbled. Rosa smiled. "Actually, Mr. Harper," she said, setting a thick folder on the counter, "I'm here about the sale of this property." Edgar's eyes snapped to hers. Confusion flickered across his face before recognition set in. His brows knitted together. "You?" He let out a dry laugh. "You can't be serious." But Rosa was serious. Dead serious. She opened the folder and slid a contract toward him. "Langston and Company is acquiring the property. And I'll be the managing agent overseeing the sale. Which means," she leaned in slightly, her voice calm but firm, "this store, your store, is about to have a new owner." Edgar's face paled. "That's impossible." Rosa tilted her head. "Is it?" For the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. And she had never felt more powerful in her life. Edgar Harper stood frozen, his eyes darting from the contract to Rosa's face, searching for some sign that this was a joke. But Rosa didn't waver. She held her ground, her expression calm, composed, powerful. "No," Edgar scoffed, shaking his head as if trying to will reality away. This can't be happening. You don't belong in a place like this." Rosa arched a brow. "A place like this?" she repeated, her voice quiet but sharp as a knife. Edgar's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, he was the one fumbling, the one unsure. "You thought I was nothing," Rosa continued. "A beggar. A burden. Someone unworthy of standing in your store." She gestured around, her gaze sweeping over the peeling paint, the flickering light overhead. "But here we are. And now, you're the one being asked to leave." Edgar's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I built this place with my own 2 hands. It's mine." Rosa nodded. "And now, it's for sale." She let the words sink in, watching the realization settle into Edgar's stiff shoulders. He looked at the contract as if it were poison, as if signing it would strip him of more than just bricks and shelves. It would strip him of his control. "You can't just waltz in here and take everything I worked for," Edgar spat. "That's not how the world works." Rosa inhaled slowly, steadying herself against the fire rising in her chest. "Do you think the world was ever fair to me, Edgar?" His mouth clamped shut. She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I cleaned floors for people who looked right through me. I stretched a single dollar until it tore. I've been humiliated, cast aside, kicked out of places like this. And yet," she tapped the contract, "here I am, sitting on the other side of the table." Edgar's jaw tightened. "I won't sell to you," he said stubbornly. Rosa smiled. "You don't have a choice." His eyes flared with rage. "You're in debt, Edgar," she continued, her tone almost sympathetic. "You took out loans to keep this place running, didn't you? But the world changed. Big chains moved in and your sales dried up. Now the bank is knocking on your door." She slid another paper across the counter. "I did my homework. You have exactly 30 days before they seize this store." Edgar snatched the paper, scanning it with trembling fingers. Rosa saw the moment he realized she was right. His shoulders sagged just the slightest bit. "And the worst part?" Rosa continued, her voice unwavering. "No one else wants to buy this place. The bigger companies don't see the value. But I do." She tapped the contract again. "You sign this, you walk away with a payout. You refuse?" She shrugged. "You lose everything." A heavy silence settled between them. Edgar's breathing was shallow, his eyes darting to the door as if searching for an escape. There was none. The walls were closing in on him, and for the first time in his life, he was the one without options. Rosa saw the fight flicker in his eyes one last time before it drained away, replaced by something else. Defeat. He exhaled sharply, his face twisting with bitterness. "You think this makes us even?" he muttered. "You think you won?" Rosa didn't blink. This was never about winning, Edgar. It was about changing the game. Edgar let out a hollow laugh, his fingers tightening around the pen. For a moment, Rosa thought he would throw it across the room. But he didn't. With a sharp, jerky motion, Edgar Harper scrawled his name at the bottom of the contract. The store was no longer his. It belonged to her. And just like that, the story had changed forever. As Edgar pushed the contract back to her, Rosa could see the weight of it sinking into his bones. He had spent his life looking down on people like her, never imagining that one day he'd be the one at their mercy. His lips pressed into a thin line. "So, what now?" he asked bitterly. "You gonna kick me out? Make a big show of it?" Rosa tilted her head, studying him. It would be easy. It would be satisfying. She could have security escort him out the same way he had forced her to leave. She could humiliate him, make sure he knew exactly how it felt to be powerless, to be nothing. But Rosa wasn't him. She sighed, closing the folder. "You have 30 days to pack up and leave." Edgar frowned. "That's it?" Rosa met his gaze. "That's it." Because her victory wasn't in his downfall. It was in her rise. Edgar scoffed, shaking his head. "You're soft." "No," Rosa said, giving him one last look. "I'm just better than you." And with that, she turned and walked out the door, her store, her future waiting just beyond it. She had spent her life being underestimated. Now, the world would see exactly what she was capable of. The next morning, Rosa stood in front of Harper's Market, her market. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of gold and soft lavender. A new day. A new beginning. She unlocked the door, stepping inside. The air carried the faint scent of old wood, dust, and something stale, a store clinging to its past. But that past was over. The news had already spread through town like wildfire. Rosa Martinez, the woman who had once been kicked out, was now the owner. The reactions were swift and mixed. Some people, those who had looked down on her, sided with Edgar, or simply didn't believe she belonged in the business world, were shocked, even resentful. But others, the people who had struggled alongside her, saw something else. Rosa wasn't just buying a store. She was breaking a cycle. That afternoon, as she sat in the office, formerly Edgar's office, though she planned to remodel it, there was a knock on the door. She turned to find Mrs. Reynolds, the elderly woman who had witnessed her humiliation the day Edgar kicked her out. Mrs. Reynolds stepped inside cautiously, gripping her purse. "I just had to come see it for myself," she said, a glimmer of something in her eyes. Pride, maybe? Rosa smiled. "I suppose it's a bit surprising." The old woman chuckled. "Surprising? Child, this is justice." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There were plenty of times Edgar ran off people like you. Poor folks, immigrants, people who didn't look right to him." Her expression darkened. "But nobody ever came back. Nobody ever fought back." Rosa swallowed. "Until now." Mrs. Reynolds nodded. "Until now." She reached into her purse and pulled out a $10 bill. "I don't need anything right now, but when you reopen, I'll be your first customer." Rosa felt an unexpected lump in her throat. She took the bill, squeezing Mrs. Reynolds' hand gently. "I'll be ready for you." Later that evening, Rosa walked into her small apartment, greeted by Daniel's laughter as he played with his toy superheroes. He looked up, his eyes bright. "Did you get the store, Mom?" She smiled, kneeling beside him. "I did, baby. It's ours now." Daniel's face lit up. "Really? Does that mean we won't have to worry anymore?" Rosa swallowed the lump in her throat. She had spent so long fighting, so long scraping by, that the idea of stability still felt unreal. She cupped his face. "It means things are going to get better." Daniel beamed. "Can we sell pancakes?" Rosa laughed, pulling him into a hug. "You know what? Maybe we will." Because now, she decided what happened next. A week later, Edgar Harper packed his final box. The store was officially no longer his, and the weight of that truth hung heavy on his slumped shoulders. The townspeople watched as he locked the doors for the last time. Some pitied him. Others thought he deserved it. Rosa stood nearby, watching the moment unfold. Edgar turned, meeting her gaze. For a second, she thought he might say something, one last bitter remark, one final show of arrogance. But instead, he just gave a slow nod, as if finally understanding that this was his consequence. Then, without another word, he walked away. And Rosa? She stepped forward, unlocked the doors, and walked into her new future. A month later, Harper's Market was no more. The old, worn sign had been taken down. The dust-covered shelves had been scrubbed clean. The faded walls were painted in fresh, inviting colors. In its place stood Rosa's community market. This wasn't just a store anymore. It was a statement. Rosa had made changes, not just in the appearance, but in the way the business operated. The store now had affordable sections for low-income families, a discount day for struggling workers, and a pay-it-forward program where customers could contribute toward groceries for those in need. And the most noticeable change? The people who once felt unwelcome in Edgar's store now walked in with their heads held high. On opening day, a crowd gathered outside, buzzing with excitement. People who had once been turned away now stood at the front of the line. Families, workers, dreamers. Mrs. Reynolds was there, standing tall with her $10 bill. And right beside her was Rosa's mother, wiping proud tears from her eyes. Daniel held onto his mother's hand, bouncing on his toes. "Are you ready, Mom?" Rosa took a deep breath, gripping the key tightly in her palm. She wasn't just unlocking a door. She was unlocking a future she had built with her own hands. With a smile, she turned the key and opened the doors to her new life. That night, after the excitement settled, Rosa stood outside the store, looking up at the new sign. Her name, her legacy. She thought back to that day, when she had stood on this very sidewalk, humiliated and powerless, as Edgar's words cut through her like a blade. But today she had rewritten the story. Because power wasn't just in money or status. It was in resilience. It was in the refusal to be defined by someone else's cruelty. She had been kicked down, underestimated, and told she didn't belong. But she didn't fight for revenge. She fought for change. And that was worth more than any victory Edgar Harper could have ever understood. As Rosa walked home that night, she thought about the countless people still fighting their battles. The single mothers, the struggling workers, the dreamers who were told no over and over again. To them, she would say, "Don't let them tell you who you are. Don't let them decide your worth. Because one day, the same doors that shut in your face might just be the ones you walk through as the owner. And when that day comes, make sure you leave the door open for someone else."